How do you manage to keep up with everything?
You know, I think time management is everything. And I also think it's working. Everything I do, every time I go to work, it's doing something I love and enjoy. And so when I'm enjoying what I do so much, it doesn't feel like it's so cliche to say, but it just doesn't
Mm,
feel like work the same way. So, and I just have some really big goals and dreams, and I'm determined to work towards those. So that keeps me really motivated. I think first and foremost, I'm just there to do a job and I'm not
mm,
asking for any different treatment. I am asking for consistency. And truly, it's just I want consistency of policy and I want to be treated like every other qualified individual in that room.
mm,
I also do think, though, that every single time I've worked with a male dominant sport, to have the leadership in that environment ask me how they can best support me or show action
mm.
to support me, and by showing and demonstrating me respect and like demonstrating that in front of their players or their athletes, like that has made such a world.
Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. Today I am filming at KD Fit. He's been nice enough to let me borrow his space for filming my podcast. So big shout out to KD Fit. Today we have Caroline. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, good. How are
I'm
you?
good. It's a long time no speak. What's been up?
I know, way too long. Oh, I've just been busy. I'm in physical therapy school, working, and living life.
Just doing it all. No, so if you just give us a little introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Caroline. I am an I'm a yoga instructor for athletics. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I'm a student at Tufts University in their doctor of physical therapy program. So, I'm also currently going through Satanta College to obtain my master's in sports rehabilitation and performance. So I wear a lot of hats these days. I'm most definitely a student these days, and I would consider myself a lifelong learner. So I enjoy that. But I am pretty much training in all of my free time. I slowly am becoming potentially a triathlete and I'm enjoying that journey. So that's kind of been my more fun free time side of things. But um, I am primarily an instructor for elite athletes in yoga.
Yeah, how do you do it all? I know we've kind of spoke off camera, um, but yeah, how do you manage to keep up with everything?
You know, I think time management is everything. And I also think it's working. Everything I do, every time I go to work, it's doing something I love and enjoy. And so when I'm enjoying what I do so much, it doesn't feel like it's so cliche to say, but it
Mm,
just doesn't feel like work the same way. So, and I just have some really big goals and dreams, and I'm determined to work towards those. So that keeps me really motivated.
yeah, so how did you essentially? I know how you sort of started in your journey because we started at UW together, but how did you
Mhm.
go from sort of S&C coach to then wanting to do the yoga side for athletes?
So I actually was a yoga instructor prior to the strength and conditioning internship with University of Washington football. So I always really loved what yoga had to offer, not just from a physical standpoint in flexibility, mobility practices, but really on more of an emotional and mental health care
Mm,
level. So for me, once I got into the strength and conditioning spaces and kind of built that rapport with the coaches and the athletes, it was a really natural next step to begin to integrate yoga into that experience. So that's kind of how it ended up working out for me. And then once I started up with football, I reached out to a few other sports and they said absolutely.
mm.
We would love to integrate yoga into our schedule, and it's been a super fun journey for me. It's been really interesting to focus on like specifically elite athletics for this
Mm,
time period, and um, cater towards each of the sports individually, since all of them are going to have their different needs. All of them are, it's different team sizes for everyone. There's different logistics for every single team I teach for. So it keeps me on my toes. It keeps my life interesting, and I enjoy that about it.
yeah. So how did your journey sort of start? From
Oh my gosh. I actually would probably say that my journey started back to when I was 13 years old. Um, I was chronically injured when I was 13 and started having undiagnosed bilateral leg pain, and no one could figure it out. So I began going to physical therapy, but that didn't really resonate, and started going to acupuncture, and that helped in my pain management immensely. And I thought that for a very long time, that's what I wanted to ultimately do. But I ended up, once I got injured, also had 4 kneecap subluxations on each knee, which led me to having 2 knee surgeries. And then just more recently, a third for an ACL reconstruction. So for me, my journey really starts with getting injured.
mm,
And I think for a lot of people who end up in strength and conditioning, I know for I know there's a lot of athletes who've had great experiences with coaches in their undergraduate athletic experience, maybe playing Division 1, 2, what 3, whatever it is, but playing a sport competitively. And for me, it was actually precisely the thing that kept me out of sports that made me want to be involved with it that much
mm,
more. So following those 2 knee surgeries, I began teaching bar 3, which is a combination of strength conditioning, cardio, and mindfulness. So I've been teaching that for 5 years now, and I started teaching that right after my second knee surgery, pretty much. So I
uh,
began training for that. And that is where my love for group exercise and teaching group fitness really began. So following that, about 2 years later, I became a yoga instructor and was fascinated by that whole journey, and really liked how it complemented all the physical strength that I was already building with bar 3. Um, and then it wasn't until my third knee surgery, when I had my ACL reconstruction, that I actually really got into specifically lifting weights,
mm,
more of the strength and conditioning, like traditional strength and conditioning, weight room type work. So I'd already been in the strength and conditioning world and in the group fitness world, but more starting to lean towards the personal training side of things and explore that a little bit more. So, um, yeah, it was really getting injured that led me to have to get really creative about
mm,
how I could move my body, ways that felt really good for me and supportive for me to move my body. And then figuring out how much I love sharing that with people, that led me to where I am now.
yeah,
And now, of course, physical therapy school, and all fascinated about rehabilitation and bridging that gap
mm.
between, rehabilitation and return to sport.
Yeah, you've
So,
said something very interesting. It's something that I try and implement as much as I can when people come in with injuries for me. And you said that you're training for surgery. Can you sort of break that down and how important that is?
yeah. So you mean like training prior to
Yeah.
or
So
after
like
surgery?
training to get some strength into it so that when you do have surgery, then it's easier to come back from because that strength is already.
Yeah, I think a lot of what motivates me now is precisely that concept, that if I think once you've sustained an injury and it's been really life altering for you, it can be hard not to think about the possibility of it happening
Mm,
again. At least for me in my personal experience, that's what I've found. And so I find that it's one, a celebration of how far I've come and what my body is capable of doing every time I get to work out, every time I get to move my body. Like, whenever I need a reality check, that's what I come back to, is the fact that I am so grateful. Like it is such a blessing that I get to move my body, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's swimming or running or biking, whatever it is, dancing. Like I went and took a hip hop class the other day for fun, just
Nice.
as a way to celebrate like how far I've come. Because for me, I wasn't always able to do that, and there's always that fear, at least for me, because life is super unpredictable, and who knows? It's plausible we can only mitigate the risk of injury. We
Mm.
cannot truly prevent
Yep.
injury. So for me, all of those things are ways of mitigating the risk of injury, not preventing
Mm.
injury. But by mitigating the risk of injury and in that process of building as much strength as we have or as we can, then when you go into surgery or something like that, hopefully you have that more solid base that's going to set you up for success in terms of muscle activation following surgery and all of that. But it's not always possible, especially like once an athlete sustains or once an individual um, sustains an injury, that you can't always start prepping for surgery at
Mhm.
that point in time. So really, that preparation begins before you even sustain the injury. Um, in the case of my ACL reconstruction, though, like I was still able to cycle before
Mm.
I went in for surgery. So I tore my ACL, but then that like literally the night before surgery, I was cycling. I was on my stationary bike because I was like, I just have to celebrate this while I can. I have to just soak
Mm.
this in while I can. And I also want to like try and just maximize my strength and maximize, this experience before I go into surgery. So, um, but a lot of times, most often, that's before sustaining the injury
Yeah.
itself. So
So how does that now tie in with your sort of post grad work to the work that you have been doing?
it's everything. Like, I think it's so funny when people ask me what I do. What I truly do is human body movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I love. That's what I'm interested in. And all of my goals are pretty much surrounded by my interest in human body movement. Um, so with physical therapy school and with my master's in sports rehabilitation and performance, it's all centered around the same stuff. So my interest isn't just working with an individual after they've sustained an injury or after they've had surgery and then working with them in that acute pain phase or acute injury phase, but I love the strength and conditioning side of things because it allows us to take so much more knowledge into the rehabilitation process and understanding like if we're truly wanting to help an athlete rehabilitation for return to sport, we can't just get them back to that point where they're walking
Mm-hmm.
because and for some people that is what their meaningful life activities are is they want to be able to play with their grandkids, they want to be able to put their dishes back in the cabinet, and they want to be able to walk, and they're happy with that, and that's where the rehabilitation process ends, in a lot of outpatient physical therapy. But with an athlete, we have to get them back to this point where if you're playing volleyball, you have to jump,
Mm.
and you have to not only be able to jump decently, you have to be able to jump frequently. You have to be able, like all of the different demands given your position and your role in a specific sport. And we have to consider that when an athlete gets injured and then rehabilitate them to the point where they can walk, but also take it a step further and get creative
Mm.
with strength and conditioning and the rehabilitation process and start to really bring those two things together to bridge that gap and create a better return to play experience for these athletes.
Yeah. So how does the implementation of yoga come into the S&C world, the rehab, and how do you conjoin them?
So yoga is so much more than a physical practice. It's one of the first things you learn when you go through your yoga teacher training. And if you are someone who's practiced yoga or especially has had experience practicing yoga really consistently, that's something you'll start to pick up on is that, oh, this is way more than just getting flexible. So
Some of the damn
it's
hardest
truly
workouts
about,
I've ever had are yoga. It's
yes,
hard when you're having to like hold your body weight for a certain position for like a certain amount of time. Mine is always warrior pose. Oh,
Oh,
when you get me in that lunge and stretched out, I'm like,
yeah. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. And that's the part of the amazing like it's one amazing component that yoga has to offer, that it can help you get stronger. It can help you become more flexible, more mobile, and all of those benefits that a lot of people frequently talk about. But I think truly at its core, yoga is also historically a very spiritual practice. It has its roots in India, and for a lot of people, it still remains a very spiritual practice, and it can be that to any individual who practices yoga if that's something that speaks to them. But regardless, it can be a really meditative and mindful practice.
hmm,
Um, and I think that is so important, and it often gets really overlooked in the athletic spaces because we have a really large emphasis on the physical body.
hmm,
But when it comes down to it, when you're a student athlete, when you're a professional athlete, there is a huge, huge mental component and emotional component to your sport. You've invested so much. And when your mind's not right, you're not going to be nearly as present. You're not going to be nearly as engaged. And that's going to take a toll. And I mean, it inevitably is going to spill into the physical piece of your sport, of practice, of your match, of your game, whatever it might be, if that goes unchecked.
hmm.
And so I think it ties deeply into mental health. And I don't know that that's really, it's not something that is discussed, I
Yeah.
think, probably enough in the world of, I don't know, everyone says that though.
No, I
Like,
definitely
just
think you're
enough.
right though. I think that like I've just filmed a podcast with Nima, and
Mhm.
we were sort of talking about the like why the example that he sort of presented was he doesn't get why quarterbacks have to run gut busters or just like any type of conditioning work. And I think
Yeah.
for me, it's the mental side. Like if you think about
Yep.
how much mental pressure that they're under, like that plays into cortisol, that has different hormones pumping through your body. So they
Mhm.
need to be able to handle that load and still be able to keep their heart rate down to perform movements and to perform at their best.
Right.
So having that conditioning is is as important as having your mind right. Because like
Yeah.
if you don't have your mind right, that cortisol rises and you're like freezing. You're just like, ooh, what do I do now? And there are these high stake situations. So for me, it's just
Right.
like I think you are absolutely right. Like the mentality and like just being able to stay cool and calm and collected during those times are what matters the most.
Right. And I think a lot of times if it helps to think about it as mental conditioning,
Mm,
you can even think about it that way because that's essentially what it is. It's this practice of, um, you know, building your tools in your toolbox to, when you are in a high stress situation, be able to manage your emotions, regulate all of that to be able to deliver a successful athletic physical
mm-hmm.
performance. And by, a lot of the work I do with athletes too, and and I kind of joke about it, like I'm kind of sneaking the medicine in the cheese a little bit,
Yeah.
because if I were to like I never walked into football and was like, I'm going to teach you guys some breathing techniques today that are going to help calm you down. Like, never did I ever walk into football and try to like immediately sell them on meditation. However, I try to sneak the medicine in the cheese. So, I speak to a lot of athletes I work with are really much more interested in getting more mobile, more flexible. They feel like their hamstrings hurt them all the
Mm,
time. And so I'm like, okay, let's address a lot of those complaints that you have. But there's also a lot of really great literature that supports by learning to breathe diaphragmatically and utilizing breathing
mm-hmm.
techniques that actually does deliver a physical benefit. So because your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system are closely linked, like we have that rest and digest mode, the fight and flight mode, and we need to be able to regulate,
Mm-hmm.
okay, when are we, what kind of autonomic tone are we calling upon in that moment? And so a lot of times I just have to sneak the breath work in with the mobility drills. And I find though that it really has been, I've seen my athletes
Mm.
use these techniques that I teach them, the breathing techniques that I teach them in their tennis matches. Like I've seen that happen. I've seen them utilize it before a game.
Yeah.
And that's the coolest moment for me too. Like that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah. How
Makes it
how is the sort of atmosphere when you're taking these guys and women through yoga, like during and after practices?
I don't even know if I have adequate words to describe like what I when I show up to every single day is different. Like I think that's just it. It's so hard to sum it up because every single team I teach is different. Every single day I teach them is different. Time of day makes a world of
Mm.
difference. If it's 7 a.m. and they just want to go back to bed, sometimes that's actually the best for me because they're lower energy. They're like, oh, we get to just chill out here. Great. You know, and then if it's in the middle of the day, we're high energy, just got back from practice and it was super high charged, whatever it is, like it's just all so dependent on all of these different factors that are on everyone's
Mm.
plates. Like when it's the Kraken, it totally depends. A lot of times I'm seeing them off season. So it's completely different energy than when they're on the road all the
Yeah.
time, you know?
So
So,
if you want to give us a like a little breakdown of what teams and athletes you actually coach and how the differences between them.
okay, so I'm working with about 10 different teams
Um,
right now. So a majority of them are UW athletics. Thank you. Thank you. Um, I work with men's and women's golf, men's and women's tennis, men's soccer, football, basketball, men's and women's crew. I work with the NHL Seattle Kraken, and I've done some work with the Major League Rugby team here.
mm,
So they're the Seattle Seawolves and softball. I knew I was missing one at UW. So I think that's everyone, but I might be missing a few. Oh gosh,
how did that
I
all
might have
start
someone.
for you?
It all started with football. It all started with football. So I just kind of it was snowballed, and then I had after I'd reach out to a few teams, and then after a little while, I had a few teams reach out to me
Mm,
because they'd heard about me because I'm just essentially
unicorn.
essentially the University of Washington like go-to yoga instructor now. I don't know. I feel
What's the
really. It
different
feels
atmosphere between all the
cool.
different teams?
Oh my word. Golf and tennis are really similar, and I think they're super um receptive
Mm,
to yoga, and I think they really value the breathing techniques and the mental component because it's so huge in their sports. Like you talk about tennis, you talk about golf; those are hugely mental
mm.
game. Um,
I
I think
just
when it comes to
I just got
yeah,
done playing golf with my brother, and the mental torture that me and him subject each other to.
yeah,
we talk so much trash to each other.
yeah, but also like it's it's silent
Mm,
a lot of the time too. Like out on the course, they're really comfortable with quiet, which is cool.
yeah.
Um, Whereas football is such a high energy atmosphere. Same with basketball, um, and soccer is even that way too. It's really fascinating. I think it's kind of based on what environment you're used to, kind of
Mm.
determines a little bit of the approach I take.
Yeah.
Um, but every single sport has their different vibe. Also, it's so dependent on coaching staff. What is the strength staff like? Do they value, mobility? Is that something they're already incorporating? Is this totally new to them? And then that's going to determine so much of, okay, well, what work do I then have
Mm.
to do? So I almost pretty much, I think every single time I've ever worked with a team, I've first spoken to their strength and conditioning coach
Nice.
and their head coach or assistant coach or whoever the point of contact is. Because I want to ensure, okay, what is your team's experience with this? Are they receptive to it? Is this something that's entirely new to them? Do they have a consistent mobility routine? Or, are we just working from square one?
Hmm.
So,
So I know you kind of previously touched on that, like your whole focus is human body movement and like how to make that efficient. What, if any, like differences do you apply for different teams, or how do you look at that process?
yeah. Oh, yes. For hockey, so much of it is hips. So if I'm working with, and it's
Is that
totally
ice
depends on the
hockey or field hockey?
ice
Ice
hockey.
hockey. Okay.
So, and for it depends on the position too, because I will have, a football quarterback coming with a different complaint than an offensive lineman.
Mm.
Um, but there's definitely some general themes. So, generally speaking, almost every athlete I've worked with will tell me I pretty much start like when I plan my classes, I always go in with a general plan if no one is really has any specific requests or anything like that. But once I do show up, I ask them, okay, how are you feeling? What's in your body is sore? Where is there extra tension today? What did today look like for you guys? Has this week been really stressful? And I gauge based on what they're telling me and based on their energy, what needs to happen that
Mm.
day. So a lot of the requests that I get are hip flexors, glutes, hamstrings, quads. A lot of time it's really lower body focused for
Hmm.
these teams. Um, and I think that's pretty much across the board for all sports is those are the general complaints. And a lot of times too, they're, sore from a lift or
Hmm.
whatever. So I think there's that confounding variable. But when it comes to the sport specifically, like ice hockey goalies have so much internal hip rotation
Yeah, because they'll need
that
to.
yes, it's wild. And so the external hip rotation is just, we start to work on a little more that mobility. I give them some more external hip rotation focused stretches. And sometimes even incorporating some more S&C type stuff, like after your lift, go do this
Mm.
because that's going to, or before your lift, I want you to think about X, Y, or Z to activate these muscles in order to start to correct maybe some of these range of motion deficits or um, if it's a strength imbalance, that sort of thing too. But that's hard to do. That's getting a little more physical therapy, and that's hard to do without an eval. But if I have an athlete talking to me one on one, I'll kind of see what seems to be the issue and maybe recommend some few stretches or um, activation exercises.
Yeah. So can you take us through like the principles of how you formulate these programs and these plans for these athletes?
Yeah, like the individual or more
Both.
the general.
Both. I kind of want to know both.
Okay, so I mean, really, it's kind of like what I already said. It's just usually I have 5 stretches I basically give every single athlete. It's a hip flexor stretch, groin stretch slash adductor stretch, um, glutes, hamstrings, and usually like a quad stretch as well. Because those are like I said, the primary complaints I get. Um, but when it comes to like if I'm working with crew, they're usually really asymmetrical because they row on one
Mm.
side and one side only. So I have to think about that. And, a lot of times with tennis or with golf, or softball, they're rotational sports. So sometimes they'll have more thoracic spine rotation in one direction than the other. So it's thinking about, okay, what are some of those poses that we can incorporate to maybe start to get a little bit
Mm,
more even, start to correct some of those imbalances. So maybe we're mitigating the risk of injury, and not getting too dominant on one side and creating a whole bunch of
mhm,
range of motion imbalances, essentially. Really, I just open it up after every class I teach. I say, if there's anything specifically you're working through and um, you're wanting a few extra stretches, you can always feel free to ask me. I'm here to connect, here if you want to chat and you have any specific questions. I'm absolutely willing to field those. And that's usually when I'll start to get more of a story with an athlete.
mm,
And I always, first, if they're like, I'm in pain, had this injury, the first thing I say is, have you talked to your athletic training staff? Because I'm not
mm,
currently, and I'm not acting in the capacity as their practitioners. So I know that that's not my role, is
mhm,
not to diagnose them. My role is not to identify, like, you need to go get an x-ray, you need to go see. I'm not, I'm just the yoga instructor in this situation and a strength and conditioning coach in this situation. So I'm acting as such, but I'm shocked by the number of times they're like, no, I actually haven't. Maybe I should do that.
yeah,
Sometimes it's a matter of telling them, okay, go do that, then come back to me, let me know what they said, and I can work with you from there.
yeah,
The other half of the time, it's, yes, I saw them. This is what they told me. I said, great. What have they given you so far? And
mm,
then I just, based on my knowledge and my experience, will give them any additional stretches or exercises or that I think could be beneficial for them, as long as they've been cleared by
mm,
AT.
yeah. So, how does it feel to then help them through these situations after they've seen the physical therapists and that the right team first?
It's the coolest part of my job. It's the reason I do what I do. I do what I do because, like I've said, I love human body movement, but the reality is I'm in it to, especially, I think, provide support and to help people who maybe on such big teams, it's really
Mm,
hard to gain such a, I guess, a personal level of support with, from athletic training and from coaches. And there's just some of the people who maybe don't get as much playing time are not necessarily getting the same sort of support to
mm,
return to sport, I guess, if that makes sense. And they just kind of, I feel like there's a few, I don't know, I hesitate to say that a little bit. It's not true in all cases, but it can just be really easy, I think, for people to feel as if they've fallen through the cracks a
mm,
little bit. And so getting to just support those people and let them know that they do have someone on
mm.
their team and on their side is really what I see as a big piece of what I do.
Yeah. So, how do you find
Um,
the buy-in and the rapport that you build through these to then get them to start playing their sports as normal?
well, I think a big piece is like the buy-in comes with time, and I have to earn their respect first. Like, they don't know me. A lot of times, I mean, I'm independent contract work, so I come in and I'm not technically like
Staffed.
their coach.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of the approach I take, I guess, is saying, hey, this is why I'm here. I pretty much start every single time. I'm like, raise your hand if you have a consistent mobility routine. I want to see who that is. Typically, it's like one person out of a team of 20, 30, 40, 50. Like, it's usually one person, maybe two. And then I'm like, okay, who's taking yoga? Okay, great. So that kind of gives me a sense of how much explaining do I need to do about what I'm
Mm,
here to do.
yeah.
And then I just expressed to them, like, hey, this is the rationale behind this. And I think the buy-in is so often created when you can provide a why.
Mm,
And if you're not able to provide a why, then what's the point?
100%.
So I try to ensure that with every question I get from them, I'm either honest and say, I don't know. Let me go find that out. Or let me direct you to a better resource. Or two, I hear you and I appreciate that question. And here's the why behind what we are doing and why we're doing it the way we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge piece of buy-in. Like if I can give you a really good explanation for why you should be doing yoga, then okay. But if I'm like, oh, actually, I don't really know. Like, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
You know? So I really think that's a huge part of my job too, is being able to express, like, in the scientific literature, this is what is supported. And I tell my athletes, like, let's hold stretches for approximately 30 seconds to a minute, because in the scientific literature, that is what has been shown typically is most beneficial for our goals that we have here.
Yeah.
So I think being backed by science, being backed by experience, and being backed by a why makes a huge difference for creating buy-in and just giving them time.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to explain that a lot?
I do it every time I go in for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I don't expect them to immediately be on board, you know?
Yeah. What kind of
I think a lot of
success
times,
have you seen
yeah.
implementing yoga and that structure of training into these higher level sports?
I've had a lot of athletes express to me what a huge difference it's made for them in their mental health.
In what sense of their mental health?
Just in terms of they feel less stressed, they feel more present, they feel like everything on their plate is a little more manageable. Um, and that specifically the mindfulness breathing techniques and, you know, that the sort of tools I give them for that helps them with their everything on their plate. Gosh, just athletes have a lot on their plate.
100%.
Especially student athletes. So, and then in terms of, I mean, basically every single time I teach a class, I will have people walking out of there like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Like, I feel so much better. Like, my hips feel more open. My back feels like so much better. So that's pretty much the immediate feedback I get. And that goes into creating buy-in too. Like, if you walk out of there and you feel better than when you walked in, great. I've done my job and so have they.
Yeah. So how does it feel like being a sort of woman strength and conditioning and having to go into these male dominated teams?
Yeah. It's a loaded question. There's so many elements. I think first and foremost, I'm just there to do a job and I'm not asking for any different treatment. I am asking for consistency. And I think that's been one of my biggest lessons I've learned is, you know, sometimes people will think that if you're a woman in a male dominant environment that you're going to want special treatment or something different or I don't know, something along those lines. And truly, it's just I want consistency of policy and I want to be treated like every other qualified individual in that room. And so I think that's one of the biggest, I guess, takeaways for me.
Yeah.
Is that there is that common misconception. I also do think though that every single time I've worked with a male dominant sport, to have the leadership in that environment ask me how they can best support me or
Mm,
show action to support me, and by showing and demonstrating me respect and like demonstrating that in front of their players or their athletes, like that has made such a world of difference
yeah.
for me.
Can you give us an example?
um, yeah, like I think one of the first things that comes to mind is um, when I went to the started teaching yoga to men's golf at University of Washington, and we had an initial meeting with the team. It was one of the coolest things I think I've seen a team and a coaching staff do before. Is they called a meeting and introduced me to their athletes, and athletes got introduced to me, and I told them, like, instead of having to do it the first session, we just created this opportunity for them to understand why I was there and for them to ask me any questions they had to about what we were trying to accomplish.
Mm,
Um, and the assistant coach at the time, he got up in front of the athletes and just spoke to his experience of how yoga was so impactful for him
mm,
as an athlete and why this is so beneficial in his eyes. And to have someone that they already respect vouch for the value
mm-hmm.
that my business can bring to them in their sport was huge. It's because that takes so much of the pressure off of me. And already, like, I mean, it can be really difficult to create. Particularly, it is so much easier as a yoga instructor to come in and teach guys.
Mm,
It is 10 times different to tell guys how to lift weights. 10 times different. Because there is something that is in our society far more acceptable about a woman telling you how to
mm-hmm.
stretch than a woman telling you how to lift. And that was really truly my biggest struggle. But to have that coach say that about yoga was, I mean, one of the coolest things I've seen in terms of demonstrating support
Mm,
for bringing me on.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's some of the philosophies that you hold while doing all these different roles?
Um, I have a growth mindset. I think that is the pinnacle of who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I'm just constantly learning.
Mm,
And I think knowing too that, I mean, I think that keeps me humble too. Like it just, I think there's so much ego in this field. And what it really comes down to is that,
you're right.
yeah, like, but how can we really determine when someone is an expert at
Mm,
something? And like, once you determine that someone's an expert at something, well, does that like mean you just stop learning? Like, what does that mean? I guess. And so I think I just keep the focus constantly on what I have to learn. What more do I have to learn? And it's never ending.
hmm I think that's
It's
one of the
never going.
best things that we learned from Coach Mac is that, like, no matter how far you've made it into the field, like, there is always the next step. Like, you could always learn more. And like, there's this saying
Yeah.
in Portugal where it's like, you can learn something from everyone, even a dumb person. You can learn not to be them. And like that to me, I'm just like, I mean, yeah, like 100%. Like you can learn what not to do in some of the worst situations. Like panicking in a high stress situation probably isn't the best idea. So let's not do that. Let's
Mhm.
focus our energies in like coming up with solutions. And I think
Mhm.
Coach Mark really drilled that into us. And like one of the most fascinating things that he said to me, I think, was that like he falls asleep watching YouTube videos on how to get better. And like Coach Max is in the position that he's in. Like if anyone should stop learning because he knows it all, you'd assume it was him. But like he's still like continuously progressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people I know in my life who exist in this space without an ego and with that growth mindset, like that goes hand in hand. I've found. I think, there's two people that in particular in the field come to mind for me too, in terms of like one of my other mentors, he was my anatomy professor in my undergrad, and he's also a strength and conditioning coach and works in a physical therapy clinic. So he's been hugely impactful to my development in my learning process. And I think truly, I mean, I don't know how to put it into words. Like he just has really demonstrated, I think, what that growth mindset means to me too. Like he's one of those people in my life that I think has demonstrated that so solidly that, and I recognize what a huge difference that's made for every single client he's worked with and every single student he's taught, and instilling that in them too. So I feel like that, just shout out to University of Oregon Human Physiology. Like that is where that first got instilled in me for sure. Like just brained into my brain. Like, and when it comes to the human body, are you kidding me? We've like scratched the surface.
100%.
Like talk about the brain.
there's actually a very fascinating field coming up, which I'm really interested in, and I learned it from sort of people at my university, and it's like using the oxygen in the muscle as a fuel source and how much energy availability there is because of like oxygen availability, and like you can only push as much as you've got oxygen in your muscles. So the quicker that you can replenish that, the more you can get out of it. And I think like it's constantly learning, having a look at what other people are doing. And I truly believe that as soon as you think that you know it all, your career's like it's stuck. There's not much to do after that.
Yeah. Also, like, I don't know. Like, have you, like, when you run into someone who thinks they know everything, like, that's just an immediate, like, I don't trust you anymore. Like, if you think you know everything, there's far too much for any one person to know that, like, it's like you've lost my trust.
100%.
Because if anyone on this planet, I don't care what you do, who you are, you have more to learn. And so the immediate moment someone tells me like, oh, like I'm an expert, I know everything there is to know, I'm like, oh, red flag. No. Big red flag. There's so much more to learn. Everyone does.
100%. Like I think that's why I love doing this podcast as much, is because like I'm constantly learning from someone. And it's just like that constant, even like the simple things like getting better at talking on camera, being like able to just be in this presence and just like really like interact with someone else. Like I think that's the best part about it, is like learning new things, like just movement bases. Like if I've ever had any questions on like movement based or yoga based, like Caroline, let's go. Let me bombard you with a million and one questions.
I love questions. I love questions because if you're not asking them, what are we doing? Questions show you're curious and you're interested and you're invested, and I love that.
100%.
Like that's what I love. I love when athletes ask me questions too. Like just tangent, but anytime I ask me a question, I'm like, yes, you just made my day. But I'm such a nerd. I love learning. I love knowledge, and I love to share what I think I might know. from my experience, you know,
100%.
but also more for them to see what works for them and maybe go see some other resources too. That's always a beautiful thing.
Yeah. What's kind of like a routine that you do for yourself that you would like to share?
Like, what kind of routine?
Ooh. We'll go whole body.
Whole body, like strength, or are we talking like mobility? What are we talking?
We'll go mixture of both, so people can integrate
Oh
both.
my, oh my
All the hard
word!
questions. Let's go.
You're gonna have me here for like another hour. Oh, um, I don't skip your activation. I've got to
Hmm.
do my glute activation stuff. I like if I'm running, if I'm cycling, if I'm breathing, I need to do glute activation stuff.
Can you walk us through
So,
some of those exercises?
yeah, I love to do some clamshells with
Hmm.
banded clamshells or side plank clams.
Okay.
Um, and I also like to do some like banded lateral walks. But with the clamshells, I don't like hip flexion because it takes more of the focus into your hip
Hmm.
flexor, whereas if you keep your knee in line with your hip. And this is just some semantics, and I'm going to get up on a soapbox here, but
Is
then
that
it's going to kick that more into your glute.
okay? So it's like when you're like in a hip raise position.
When you're like you're sidelining,
Oh,
you're
okay. Okay, and
sideline.
you're just
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, I thought you meant like this is the clams on your back, and you were like in a hip.
Oh no, but I mean, that also sounds good.
Oh, I've just made a new exercise. Let's go. Caroline's going to try that
Oh
tonight.
man. Actually, yeah, I feel like it's definitely been a combination of things for me though. I love to back squat. Part of it's just figuring out what I love
Mm,
and figuring out what I enjoy to do that consistently. So right now I'm loving back squat. I did a little front squat block just this last strength cycle for me, but now I'm more into a back squat block again, which has been so fun.
mm.
I'm training for a triathlon. So that's been a lot of my training now is swimming, biking, and running. And then my strength training kind of becomes that supplement
Mm,
and also the huge component in mitigating injury risk, especially with the high volume of training.
mm.
So,
Running, cycling,
um,
swimming.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, and then I've had to be really intentional about stress management lately because of everything on
Mm.
my plate.
How have you been doing that?
So I found it's such a yoga instructor thing for me to say. I found a yoga studio and a yoga class that I love,
Mm,
and I go on Sunday nights, and it's like the perfect end and beginning to my previous and next week
mm.
and it helps calm me down and gives me a little, just the reset I need to
Yeah. Could
kind of,
you
because if I'm not taking care of that whole aspect, like the physical stuff does not feel good.
mm, could you take us through a little
Yeah.
breathing exercise to sort of help anyone that's sort of feeling stress?
Yeah. You want to breathe right
Let's
now?
go.
Okay. This is the one I give to all my athletes. We'll just do a little box breath. Have you done box breathing before? It's easy,
Yeah.
super easy, but it's my favorite because I think it's super effective and it gives your brain the count to think about
Mm,
and also helps to start to settle you. And I think anything to give your brain something to focus on, especially if it likes to wander like mine does, is really helpful. So you just find a seated space, you can close your eyes, you can soften them, and then start to relax. And I like to start everything with the full body scan too. So I think about relaxing from the top of my head, relaxing the eyebrows, my eyes, my jaw, my shoulders, And just starting to let that sense of ease travel down through your whole body, down through your arms, your rib cage, and starting to let your belly expand on each inhale you take in, and allowing a little more sense of ease to come in through your body with each exhale you let go of. And you just slowly will start to breathe in through the nose for a count of 4, 3, 2, pausing at the top for that same 4, 3, 2, and then beginning to exhale, 3, 2, pausing at the bottom, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 3, 2, hold, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 3, 2, 1. Pause, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just take one more cycle like that. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. And then you can slowly let the breath return to the natural rise, fall, and maybe open your eyes.
Nice.
And then maybe you feel a little calmer than when we first started.
Thank you for taking us through that. I do like that is something that I do specifically for bedtime. When like my mind's racing at 100 miles an hour. Like I always feel like nighttime's the worst because like I've got so much like thought like, and that's
Yeah.
for some reason that's when I come up with all my business ideas just before I go to sleep.
Yeah.
So I usually do.
Right.
I like to do Wim Hof's as well. I do like that one
Yeah.
to calm me down.
Oh, that's
Like that's a good one for the morning when I'm just like wanting to get hyped up.
awesome.
I'll go straight, and then I will go for a nice shower, like a cold shower. And I'm just like,
Brr.
let's go.
That's awesome.
Um,
I have yet to get into the cold baths and ice showers.
Highly recommend it. It's just
Oh,
the thing for me is like
I know.
the thing for me is like
I know.
the mental side of it as well, because like for those 3-4 minutes, like you just have to suffer. Like, but then when you get out,
Yeah.
like you warm up super quick, and like your brain's got like
Hmm.
this extra gear, and it's just like you're just like go, let's
Yeah.
go. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I really like. I like there's pretty like good ice baths right now if you don't want to necessarily like buy ice all the time. Lumi's a good
Yeah.
one.
Fair.
Yeah, Lumi's a good one. Um,
Oh,
they're reasonably priced as well, which is quite good. Um,
cool.
but yeah, like it's just like it's what I said. Like this industry is so vast, and like there's not really one
Yeah.
thing for everyone. Like just try a bunch of things.
Mhm.
What's something
Totally.
that you recommend, like that you do during your training that you think people would benefit from?
Oh man. Eat. Honestly. I think like especially as a female, there's such this misconception that you need to like cut down on carbs. Eat your carbs before your workout and eat your carbs after your workout.
Mm.
That's what I mean, that's my best training advice.
Eat.
Is if you're
That's
anything
key.
like me and you lived for years on this planet thinking that you needed to eat less bread, stop doing that. Eat
It,
your carbs.
it's like putting fuel in a car.
Yeah, and enjoy them for goodness sakes. Oh my word.
Can I ask how your training's going?
Yes. Oh my word. Oh, okay, so I attempted a half Ironman,
Mm.
right? Did I tell you about that?
Roughly.
Okay. I made it through the swim, I made it through the bike. So it's a 1.2-mile swim, a 56-mile bike, and then a half marathon,
Mm.
13.1-mile run. I don't know what that is in kilometers. I'm sorry.
UK's miles.
Oh, okay. UK is miles.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, but for anyone watching who uses kilometers, I'm so sorry. I have
It's
no
usually
idea.
it's 2.2. Col- uh, yeah, it's 2.2. So it's almost double. Whatever. So like
Yes.
I know marathon is 22.6. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's I think it's 40, just 46 kilometers, I think, for a marathon.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's almost double.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anyway, I digress. But so I'm training for my a next race like that. I want to try it again. I want to attempt it again. I missed the time cutoff by
Mm,
7 minutes to continue on to the run last time. Yeah,
damn.
and I had some I had some bike mechanical issues and stuff like that. So I want redemption, and I'm training for hopefully a half Ironman next year. And I've barely said it out loud because I'm terrified,
The
to be completely
podcast is the
honest.
best way to put
But
it.
yeah, so yes, for anyone who's listened to my voice this long, you heard it here first.
Straight off the press.
um, straight off the press, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
slow and steady, and I biked and swam
Swam.
and ran this week. So I'm back at it.
Nice.
It's going okay. It's going okay. It's a lot of work. It's a lot with school. A lot
Mm,
of times I have a stationary bike. I'll cycle while I'm in lecture. Don't tell
nice.
my professors. Um,
You're just calling
but
yourself
yeah, because
out
I have
today.
yeah. Don't tell my professors.
um,
That's okay. They probably already know.
with you kind of know the research that I did for my undergrad, and you
Yeah.
kind of know my research area. How has like the
Mhm.
monthly fluctuations for you impacted your training?
So I don't really get a consistent period.
Mm,
So for me, it's really hard to track.
right.
Um, but I can definitely tell, like, there's certain times of the cycle in the month that I feel way more. I notice bloating.
Mm,
I get I've been super bloated certain times, and I feel a little bit more, I guess, fatigued, and that's probably the main thing that I notice at certain points during the month. But the other thing I notice just so impacts me is stress.
mm.
So if I'm super stressed, it's going to make every single workout feel 1,000 times harder.
Yeah. What sort of things do you implement to mitigate that?
For my stress,
No, so for the fluctuations. I'm guessing
I
boxing
was
in.
like, a lot. That's a whole different convo. Um, Gosh, honestly, I'm really trying to figure it out still.
Mm.
I don't know if I have any good answers.
I
Um,
just had
I'm still
someone
learning.
on that does a lot of female athletes, and she coaches a lot of females, and she placed a big emphasis on nutrition and like the type of
Hmm.
foods that you eat can make it a big
Yeah.
difference. And I think that's something that I'm starting to sort of dive into now, is like the
Hmm.
nutrition side of how sort of different nutrients and minerals, vitamins can impact how a woman feels during the period or during sort of different hormonal dips and raises.
Hmm.
Have you found anything nutritionally that helps?
You know, honestly, I've been really lucky with my periods and with my cycle because I was never someone who got like super laid out by it.
Mm,
I've always been pretty able to just live life like normal. And that is not the case for like most females.
mm,
Um, So I feel very lucky that for whatever reason, that's how things have been for me. Um, I think more recently I've started to notice, but I think it's probably more linked to stress. So I just noticed that it feels
Okay.
like if I'm not, yeah, it feels like if I'm not managing my stress as well, then it kind of like I feel like then I can kind of tell differences week to week. I don't know if it's related to my cycle or if it's related to stress. It's hard to tell,
Hmm.
but it feels like it could be both. So I think they kind of play on each other.
Yeah. I mean, if we're looking at it logically, I think it does make sense because, like, obviously, stress brings up and down different hormones. You've got different hormones pumping through you and surging through your body as well. That does make sense.
Mhm.
I've never thought about it
Yeah.
that way.
I don't know. Food for thought. And I'm not an expert, but I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I think I've mentioned it to you. Like the amount of imposter syndrome I get from talking to females about periods. It's like I've
Mm.
never had one. I, like
But like some females don't even get one,
that is true.
you know? Like so and I think too it's all about like your interests in your area of study. And it's kind of similar like just because I've never played football doesn't mean that I can't help you
Mm,
lift weights, you know?
yeah, 100%.
So like because a woman, you know, a female might get a period, but you don't, it's like you've also studied it.
Yeah, like
So
this is why I love to ask female in general, just like their experience with it. Everyone's is different as well, so it's like I've never had one say the exact same thing as someone else. There's common
yeah.
ground, but there's like obviously that individuality between everyone, and like
Mhm.
I just like to know like the sort of differences that there is out there, because like if I can know them, then I can sort of look into different aspects. So like nutrition was a big one because like they said that certain foods make them feel worse. So like okay, then what
Mhm.
what is that food made out of, and why is it having this negative impact on you?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super fascinating to me.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting area of study.
Yeah,
It's so cool that you chose that. I think that's awesome that you chose
I
that.
think like I'll say this all the time. Like it's just due to one lecturer. Like she knew the the stupid mind frame that I was in, and like how to teach me accordingly. Because like she was a sociology lecturer. Big shout out to Amanda
Mhm.
Gard. But she brought up the fact that no research gets done on women, and I was
Yeah.
like, well, that's bullshit. Like
Totally.
obviously research gets done on women. What are you talking about? And then she was like, all right, okay, that's 100% fine. Task for next week: go out, find some research, come back the week after, and tell me what you found. I was like, bet. So then the week after came, and I was like, I owe you an apology. Like you're 100% right, and like there's no research on women, and like it was just that different way because she could have been like, oh my class, just bolt, like you're done, you're good, don't just shut up. But like instead she was just like, okay, she challenged me to go and find some, and then when I came back and told her there was nothing, we spoke about it. She was like, okay, this is what other things have played an impact onto this. And
Mhm.
then I was like, how can this be changed though? And she was like, you've got your dissertation coming up, how can you change it?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right.
It's a cool professor. That's a really cool professor right
She
there.
was amazing. Like
Yeah.
she hands down like changed my course of like research, and I'm just like, yeah, she's dope. I love her.
That's awesome.
Um,
I want to hang out with her. She sounds so cool.
she
I'd totally be friends.
she's good. Like the thing is, like she does so her PhD. was is on incontinence in women, and like how that has
Mm-hmm.
an impact on sort of going to classes, doing exercise, and how some women just don't because like they're embarrassed or scared that they might wet themselves. And
100%.
and for her, she was just like, I just want to change that because it's a dysfunction, so we can't fix it. Pelvic floor exercises, Kegels, that's how you stop it. But women think that as soon as that happens, like they're done. And she's like, no, like there's so much you can do. Like
Mm-hmm.
she she told me a story where I think she had went to see someone about like the different types of exercises, and she just like broke it down. She like gave her a PDF, and she was just like, this is all that you can do. Like it's not the end of the world. Like, and I think, I don't know if you've seen it, but like I've definitely been approached and asked about it. Is like when you see these like influencers like deadlifting heavy, and they just pee,
Mm-hmm.
and like they post it. They're
Mm-hmm.
thinking it's like it's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing to normalize. Like
Mm-hmm.
sure, like be comfortable in the gym to do whatever you want, but like that is still
Mm-hmm.
a dysfunction. Like
Yes.
there's so much internal
Yeah.
abdominal pressure that you're creating that you're peeing yourself. Your pelvic floors are
Yeah.
weak. You need to strengthen that. Like that is an area where you
Yeah.
can
You need to
strengthen.
go see. You need to go see a pelvic floor physical therapist.
100%. And it's just like these little
Yeah.
things that like she's sort of introduced to me that I'm just like, yeah, that's pretty messed up. Like why is that?
Yeah.
And I think like that's one of them that I've sort of been like, yeah, like no, that's not normal. She's like, men can do it too. I was like, oh, yeah, we can. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Pelvic floor physical therapy is a really interesting field, and it's hugely important. It's
Mm.
all the work that they do.
And it goes back to that thing that you were saying. It's just like bodily movement. Like everyone needs bodily movement.
Hmm. Yeah,
I've just rambled on.
it's the best. It's the best. It's the best, though.
100%. Um, so we've gone to the viewer questions segment. Um, there was one question that came in that I found quite interesting because I sort of know some of them. But it was, what's the hardest thing you faced as a female S&C coach?
Oh my word. I, oh my gosh. You already know.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about it. I do know it, but like we don't have to get into it. But like, can you just explain
I,
sort of like
yeah,
how it makes you feel and like what it sort of did to
yeah.
you at that moment in time?
I would say that, like, as a female strength and conditioning coach, I definitely have not always been respected. And there are still countless instances where I face an extreme amount of disrespect.
Mm,
Um, I've been hit on. I've been told that I can't work out in specific attire. Um, I've been told just like a whole multitude of things. And it's so challenging. It's so challenging because you want to be, the constant struggle that I face is you want to be like assertive,
mm,
and you want people to not see you as someone that they can walk all over, and then you don't want to come across as, and excuse my language, you don't want to come across as a bitch. Because so frequently, if I am to act in this similar way, probably just about arguably the same way as male counterparts, and be assertive and be loud and demand respect, that comes across as me being a quote unquote bitch, because it's just not the way that females, I guess, the role females have typically been seen in. And so to, I think, sort of emulate a similar, it's really challenging. It's so challenging. Like, I basically looked at all my male counterparts and tried to figure out, okay, how do I do this, but make it seem like it's still me, but also not come across as a bitch.
Yeah. How?
It's truly, when you take the behavior of so many male strength and conditioning coaches, and if you were just to have the same exact thing coming out of their mouth as a female, it's perceived entirely differently. And that's just really been my experience personally.
How have you dealt with these situations?
Honesty. Always honesty, and I think head on. So whenever I've had an issue, I have always communicated it to either another strength and conditioning coach, or whoever really is the point of contact for like situations that, yes, especially when it comes to like like being hit on or something like that, when I'm just trying to do my job. And I think that's what's really frustrating too, is I'm not there to be seen as someone who's like, similar to what I said at the beginning of this, I'm not asking for different treatment. I actually want consistency. And I think, you know, if other coaches aren't getting hit on, I don't want to be hit on while I'm trying to do my job. And I faced a lot of commentary. It's like, well, because, you know, you're quote unquote attractive female. And it's like, so why does that fall on me, and why doesn't it fall on the behavior of others? That's what I would like to know. You know, it's challenging. But I've just been really honest in every single conversation I've ever had with a coach or an athlete or management or anything like that. Like, you know, this is what happened, and this is how I dealt with this, and I wanted to make you aware of the situation so you can choose to kind of do with that what you will from there. So, but I have to be honest, because I really don't
100%.
know what to go about it.
I do think you're right in the sense that it's like, it's just consistency across the board that sometimes lacks with the female counterparts. So like, I know that if I'm coaching, I can shout, I can poke, I can prod, and that's fine. But as a female, you kind of have to be a little bit more careful. But then again, the roles reverse when it's males coaching females and whatever else. Like, there's certain things you need to be careful with what you're saying. But then again, that's not much on the athlete being doing to the coach as the coach, his way of being. But like, again, the consistency is 100%. Like, it should be the same across the board.
Yeah, it's really tricky though, and I think also figuring out like what feels authentic for me, like what feels like the authentic way for me to coach, but is also like aligns with the environment.
What's some of the things that you've sort of dealt with from a female coach's perspective that you kind of wish you did different?
Oh my gosh, I think it's hard to say in hindsight like what I would have done different. I think I came in really nice. And I thought that people would
Respect
meet
it.
me with that same sort of respect and kindness for that. And unfortunately, I was walked all over. So that was the lesson I learned. So and not to say I was not mean. I just became
Mm-hmm.
really cut and dry. Like I just became, this is what you're expected to do. Go do it. I
Yeah.
mean, it had to be really just straight shooting, and I had to actually, I mean, I'm a very like bubbly, smiley, like dynamic individual. And I think for me, it was actually hard because in certain situations, I had to ensure that I was being pretty freaking serious to be taken
Mm.
seriously. Uh, and that's really challenging. I think, like, I don't know. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's bad, but that's kind of just how it was for me.
Yeah. No, and like again, I was sort of there for like the beginning of like the
Mhm.
relationship you had with yoga and athletics and like building that
Yeah.
up. And that for me was like, I mean, out of every one of the interns, you were the first one to sort of get your group. So like that was a great deal of responsibility put onto you really early on. And you've just rose to that occasion. Like you just smashed it. So like for me, I think it was just like you made this opportunity, and like you did come in really nice and you were like very nice, you would do everything for everyone, but then as soon as some things sort of happened, you were just like, all right, done.
Yeah.
And then you just switched and I
Yeah.
was like, Caroline's here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was not, I haven't really experienced that so extremely
Mm,
as I did in that setting. And I think it's good to know, like, when, and it would have been entirely different with like, I think with a female team,
yeah.
because you just, so it's just part of it. It's part of the learning experience. And I think it's probably not fair for me to look back and say, like, I wish I would have come in
Guns a blazing. Yeah.
stronger. Yeah, like that. That's just an aggressive approach too. And you don't want that initial, it's just so hard. First impressions are hard. Um, I think as a female and the only female
Mm,
coaching in that weight room at that time, it was really hard because I would get so hung up on how I was going to be perceived
mm.
that it would feel paralyzing.
Like it comes down to one of those things I said, and I'm fully aware that I'm blowing smoke up your ass, but like it was one of those things that I said to you. It was like, Caroline, you need to think about like the the trail you're blazing for females coming into this industry coming up. And I was like you can just stick it out. You're good.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's always hard though at the end of the day to like know what sort of impact
Mm,
that left or that made. And was it just a moment in time that I was there, or is that, I don't know. I think it's so hard, and it's not the sort of environment that you're ever going to really know if you ever
mm,
impacted anyone ever.
yeah,
So you can't be in it for the external validation. You can't be in it to, you know, get any reassurance. Like, no
100%.
one's going to hold your hand. No one's going to validate anything you're doing. In fact, if you don't get feedback, it's probably a good thing.
100%. I know an individual that didn't get the best uh, comments.
Yeah.
Warranted, very warranted. You know who I'm talking about.
If you're getting a lot of feedback, if you're getting a lot of feedback, it might be a sign that, you know, I feel like when I wasn't getting feedback, it was like, okay, well, if someone were unhappy, they would be letting me know.
Mm,
So, but you can't be waiting around for someone to tell you good job, because it's probably not going to happen. Not in that setting
not in that
anyway.
setting. And it's that
And
high end elite. Like,
not as a female, not as the only female in a men full of women either. You're never going to get that, like, oh, girl, you slayed. You're never going to get like queen shit, it's never going to happen. But I
No,
think that's like,
yeah,
it's
hundred
just part
percent.
of it.
And I think that's what I've essentially liked to see your career and how it's progressed. Is like you started at UW, like that's not where you started yoga and what you do, but like that's where like I saw it take off because like from then I think you did Krakens and then now you've got like tennis, you've got all the UW teams, and like I think that's pretty sick.
Thank you. Oh, you're the best.
Thanks.
Made my day.
No, thank you so much for coming on, Caroline. Do you want to plug anything like your websites and
Yes, please. So, my brand is Flex by Caroline. So, flex for muscle, but also for
yes,
flexibility. So, we got my Flex merch on today to rep, but you can find me at Flex by Caroline on IG. I'm also the same on TikTok. I'm not active on TikTok though. My 18-year-old brother convinced me to get TikTok. So,
fair.
and then I have a website that's also just flexbycaroline.com. So you can connect with me on any of those platforms.
I'll
And
also link
I'm,
everything in the descriptions.
yeah, awesome. But thank you, Manny. Thank you for having me on. This was awesome. And
No, it's
it's always good to catch up with you. And it's cool to do it in this sort of format.
yeah, no,
So,
it's been a long time coming as well. I know I had some
mhm.
scheduling issues, and then you had some.
Ugh,
I'm
I have tons.
nah, it's all good. But like, the thing is, like, I'm super mindful like how busy S&C coaches are. So like,
Mhm.
or just coaches in general. Like, we're
Mhm.
always on the go and we're always like 100 miles an hour. So like, if someone's got scheduling issues that they're going to be like, I can't do it, unfortunately, but we can reschedule. I'm like, yeah, like no worries at all. Like
Yeah.
we can always come back and visit a podcast. Like I would rather you do what you do.
Yeah. Well, you're you're awesome for that. And this is an awesome thing you got going. So
Thank you.
stick with it.
Thank you.